about issues that directly and indirectly have an impact on everyday life, ignite meaningful thought and reflection, inspire my audience to action, and integrate faith principles in how we relate to others. Today, we're going to talk about gender identity and the church. In the United States, June is the month designated to Pride. It's Pride Month. And so we want to explore how the church can demonstrate the love of Christ and minister to the LGBTQ community. Later on, we also want to talk about issues affecting the South Central Conference territory in the area of public affairs and religious liberty. If you're new to the Public Square, I invite you to subscribe to our program and join us on the second Thursday of every month. You'll find us on the South Central Conference YouTube and Facebook pages. You can also view previous programs by going to iamsouthcentral.org/the-public-square. I also want to invite you to hit the like button, and then also please share this link with your family and friends so they too can benefit from the information that we share on our programs. Again, we apologize for the technical difficulties that we experience, but we are ready now to go and to talk about this issue. And so, thank you for joining us, and let's meet in the Public Square. So in this episode, we want to discuss the sensitive issue of gender identity and the church. My goal is not to talk about right or wrong or debate theology, but to try to provide helpful ideas, strategies, and to find ways that as a church, we can show Christ's love while maintaining Christ's teachings. To help me with the discussion, I've invited 5 individuals to join me. The first is with me here in the studio. Her name is Sierra Lewis. She is originally from Ohio. She serves as the administrative assistant for youth and communications for the South Central Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, located in Nashville, Tennessee. And she has an enthusiastic passion for young people. So welcome, Sierra.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining me here in the Public Square. We also have joining from the campus of Loma Linda University is Dr. Dilys Brooks, and she serves as the campus chaplain of Loma Linda University, where she provides spiritual care for the students, faculty, and staff. She too is passionate and enthusiastic about assisting individuals of all ages in knowing Christ personally and accepting his call to become change agents in the world for the kingdom of God. She's married to Dr. Delroy Brooks, and together they have 2 children. So, Dr. Brooks, welcome to the Public Square.
Thank you.
Also, we have Dr. Sandra Banjoko. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and educator working with different populations, including crisis trauma, grief and loss, human sexuality, eating disorders, and culture. She's an alumnus of Loma Linda University and earned her master's in public health in nutrition and her PhD in couples, families, and systems. As a registered dietitian, she has experience in health clinics, agencies, and hospitals, both nationally and internationally. Dr. Banjoko's commitment to support the holistic healing and growth of her clients is central to her practice. So welcome, Dr. Banjoko.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And joining us also is Amira Al-Haddad. Amira serves as the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the Southern Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. She has been working in this sphere for a number of years, and in this role, she advocates for individuals, whether it deals with Sabbath accommodations, whether it deals with pursuing justice, religious liberty, and other ways in which she can promote fairness, promote justice within the community. So, Amira, welcome to the Public Square.
It's always good to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right. And we'll be joined later by another guest, and I will introduce him at that time. So, again, I want to thank you for joining us. And I think I want to begin by just kind of diving in a little bit on defining some terms. When we talk about LGBTQ, and I stand to be corrected in terms of nomenclature, etc. When we talk about ideas of gender, when we talk about ideas of sexual orientation, please, and maybe I'll begin with you, Dr. Banjoko, if you could help define some of these terms so that we at least have a level of understanding of what we mean when we talk about gender issues and LGBTQ, etc.
Sure. Let's start off with even the acronym. So LGBTQIA plus, and we can also just say LGBT or LGBTQ plus. For that, we're talking about people who are identified with a type of sexual orientation, and the L stands for lesbian. These are people who are attracted to, these are people who identify as female that are also attracted to females. We use the LGB, so bisexual, so sorry, G, so gay, right? These are people that identify as male who also are attracted to people that are male. We are saying LGBT, so B, bisexual. These are people who are attracted to both female and male persons, and then LGBT. So T, these are people who identify as transgender. These are people who do not identify with the sex that they were born with, and they're identify with the gender that they identify with. So Q, that is the word queer. Queer also sometimes for younger people can also be used as, can also stand for questioning, meaning that they're trying to figure out what exactly they identify as, or maybe now they're experiencing the shift of realizing, oh, I don't feel like I fit into the heterosexual standards. And also, queer is also a term used for people that feel that using the term lesbian or bi or trans is kind of limiting. So, queer is kind of an encompassing term. And then we go to T, so LGBTQI. So, IA is also intersex. These are people who are born with either so both chromosomes, so both genders. So they might have like maybe we can, for example, maybe if we can use very explicit terms here, so maybe the male genital is not explicit, is not all the way formed completely, or maybe the female genitals are not all the way formed completely, and so those would be people that would identify as intersex. And then asexual are people who do not have any sexual attraction to anyone, neither do they have any sexual preference as well. And so when we talk about gender, we're typically talking, so when we're talking about gender identity, we're typically talking about persons that recognize that the sex that they were born in, either female or male, does not, the way they feel or the way they are living their lives or the way they, identify does not fit into the binary, either male or female. And so either they could be born with male genitalia and male chromosomes have and there's this conflict of like, I know I have the parts, I know I'm showing up as a certain sex, but gender wise, this is not how I feel, this is not how I'm experiencing my life, this is not how I want to live. And so they may not identify with the sex that they were born with, hence the gender piece.
Okay. Dr. Brooks, is there anything that you wanted to add by way of further explanation or further definition on this?
No, I think Dr. Banjako did a wonderful job
I
of
see where
explaining
this is
each
going.
of them.
Okay, so if I, and again, I stand to be corrected because I know that this is an ever evolving discussion, an ever evolving subject, etc. And so if I'm outdated or if I'm misspeaking, please, feel free to correct me. But it sounds like we're talking about the all encompassing anything outside of what is traditionally seen as male and female and a heterosexual relationship between a man and a woman. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, it would be a fair
Correct.
assessment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
And I think I would want to reframe that a little bit to say that this is a conversation that's been happening for folks who belong to the LGBTQIA community, and heteronormativity is catching up. Right?
Okay.
It's been placed as an us versus them when we're just not having conversations with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I'd like to add, and Dr. Banjoko, you can help me tease this out if I don't frame it. One of the challenges we have is the conflation of a conversation around gender and around sexual orientation. And there is a lot of conversations that need to be had for us to understand the differences that exist between these two ideas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what would you
I
say
think
were
when
the
we
differences?
I think when we talk about gender, we also have to touch on um, the conversations about what it means to be male or female, just heteronormativity as it is, and the challenges that exist between maleness and femaleness. And then there is the conversation about folks who identify as trans, who are navigating this path of being in alignment, right? Because when their assigned sex at birth is not in alignment with how they're experiencing themselves and the world, we often, who identify as heteronormative, do not understand that journey and often begin to assign some ideas and some biases around that. For example, we say things like someone who is trans means that they fit into a category that has to do with sexual assault or actions that aren't necessarily, the two aren't congruent, right? If someone's sexual identity does not align with the gender, the sex they were born at birth, it doesn't mean that then they are now going to be someone who will hurt or harm someone else sexually. So those just some of the nuances that I think also come up that we don't talk about, but there's this conflation of we throw everything together and begin to categorize people and treat people or talk about people in ways that are not kind or generous or generative.
Okay. So one of the question may be asked, why are we, talking about this now? Dr. Brooks, you're saying that the heterosexual community, so to speak, is late to the game. And
I would say Christian. Let me
Okay.
qualify that. The Christian sexual, heterosexual community.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's fair. And so the question is, why are we talking about this now? Well,
Yes.
part of my answer, or part of the reason why we're doing this show, and in this show we kind of tackle issues that, and not just issues, but subjects that affect the community in which we're living in, and especially as I mentioned at the top of the show, June is Pride Month. Society, especially in the United States of America, where we are located, has become more and more open to accepting the LGBTQ community. I know that there's still a way to go, but where we are now compared to where we were a few years ago has grown tremendously. Whether it's on television or movies or just in society, there's more of an openness towards that. Also, when we look at the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a big thing now here in the United States, in which whether it's schools, whether it's in the workplace, etc. There is this push to uphold diversity of individuals and equity and inclusion. I think it's important that as a church, we try to find out and try to ascertain where our place is with this. Before, and Amira, I will, kind of ask you to speak to this in a moment, but, as a church, historically, we've kind of buried our heads in the sands and pretended that issues outside of our local church congregations don't really exist. But what we have found is that not only within the workplace in which we find ourselves, within the community in which we find ourselves, but now increasingly within our own families and churches, are individuals who are part of this LGBT community who we are now coming face to face with how do we respond to these individuals. And so, Amira, I'm going to ask you in terms of if you can give a brief overview or at least kind of give us from a denominational perspective where we stand in terms of the LGBT community and us as a church.
Okay, well, let's back up just a few statements from what you had just said, because you said we haven't talked about this issue. And I agree. We haven't talked about how to treat people who are different than we are, or who have different issues than we have. But we have very, for a long time, and very purposefully, we have been having conversations within our church on homosexuality. I think I'm not really old enough to have entered into those conversations when they really started, but when I look back at growing up as a junior and then a teen in Sabbath school classes, I remember that when the issue of AIDS really came out and started to become an issue, that seems to kind of be the turning point where the church started taking up talking about homosexuality, not so much same-sex marriage, but just, the biblical perspective on homosexuality. And we really haven't stopped talking about that. And I'm going to guess that was somewhere in the early 80s, maybe, that we started talking about it. We've kind of segued into now talking about same-sex marriage, and now we're in the transgender conversation with ourselves. But how we talk about it is based on our biblical worldview. And so, because it is based on our biblical worldview, the way we talk about it is very limited in terms of right and wrong. And what we fail to have done, and I think what you're referring to, that you said we haven't entered this conversation, we have not entered the conversation of how do we treat people who come into conflict with our biblical understanding of these issues, and yet who are in the church or grew up in the church or are the children of people in our church, or even God forbid we go so far as to actually think that maybe salvation might be for those people that are outside the church, right? So we haven't fully incorporated how to have a conversation with people who have a different story than our story. So we think in terms of, well, this person made this conscientious decision to be transgender, or they made a conscientious decision to become a homosexual. But then I have to say, let's back up. Let's wait and stop just a minute. And when I say stop just a minute, I mean right now, everybody watching, stop just a minute and answer silently to yourself, when did you decide that you were
Mhm.
going to be a heterosexual?
Mhm.
What morning did you wake up and say to yourself, "Hey, I'm going to be a heterosexual for the rest of my life?" Because I don't know about you guys, I never woke up one morning and decided that was going to be my sexual orientation. It's just how I am. And so we kind of need to understand that other people may have woke up and not made a decision, but just realized, hey, this is how I am. So it's not something, we talk in terms of this is something that they decided. They woke up one morning and they decided, am I going to have oatmeal or applesauce
Right.
for breakfast, right? No, this is just something that they came to term to realize this wasn't the choice. This was who their brain is telling them that they are. So I think we need to start backing up a little bit from the conversation that we had because we've pretty much figured out what the biblical position is on marriage. We've pretty much figured out what the biblical position is on same-sex marriage, on homosexuality, on transgender. So we don't need to have that conversation. The conversation we need to have is, how do we reach out to people who are experiencing this in their lives? And how do we reach out to people who have people in their lives that are, how do we reach out to parents of transgendered children? How do we reach out to brothers and sisters of LGBTQ, people that are in our church? And,
Hmm.
think about this. You're a Sabbath school teacher. You taught juniors or teens, and suddenly you find out that one of your favorite kids from Sabbath school it has decided to reveal that they are part of, this community that is different than the community we live in. Does that change how you feel about that person? Does that change the way you're going to treat that person? Should that person never show up in church again? Do you not want that person to show up in church again? So we have to, this is where the conversation needs to progress to. We've had a lot of decades of talking about the biblical view. We need to progress to say, how would Jesus do this? And that's what we need to do.
Okay, I want to get a younger voice in here. I know that Sierra is with me. As a young person who is more, I hate to say it like this, but maybe I'm just aging myself. But the sphere in which I operate, it is not as wide and broad and vast as yours. What are you experiencing in terms of your circle of friends and etc. As they are wrestling with the issue of how they relate to the church or how the church relates to them?
I mean, I think a lot of people that I'm around feel like the church doesn't relate to them because we treat them bad. We treat people who identify in the LGBTQ plus IA community like they're an afterthought, or we treat them as though that they don't matter, and we don't treat all sin the same. Like we weaponize, or we make the LGBTQ plus agenda like demonic, and it's almost starting to feel like you don't want us. It's a because I'm straight, or because I just continue to believe what the Bible says, and we teach it that way, and we believe that way, that you don't want anything to do with us.
Okay, okay. Anybody want to respond to that?
I do. I think, part of the conversation around how long we've been having these conversations, specifically as Christians who are Adventists, is, and I appreciated what Amira said, we've been having this conversation for a long time. However, the journey from beginning the conversation to getting to what Sierra just said, which is the confronting the ways that we have been harmful and a welcoming, there's a lot of space in between, right? And one of the things I want to name and acknowledge is when a person comes into the realization that their sexual identity is not in alignment with heteronormativity, that they typically are grieving. They're going to go into a season of grief until they come to a place where they're able to come out. And when we find out, using the example that Amira gave, that a person who you taught in Sabbath school or you you did life with comes and says to you, you know what, I want to share with you that my sexual orientation or my gender identity is different than the way that I've been doing life, then we immediately go into grief, right? Because there's been a disruption. There's been a change from what we call normal. And one of the things that I think we should be asking ourselves when we engage in this conversation about how do we treat people who are different is what's going on inside of me? And can I name what that is, right? Creating space, as Sierra said, instead of treating people as if they are an issue, as opposed to saying you are still made in the image of God. You do belong to the family of God, and there's room for you here, and we want to do life with you. What we end up doing is lean into how we feel, and we don't name how we feel, and we react based on the cultures and our interpretation of scripture. I grew up in a culture, my ethnic identity, I'm a Afro-Caribbean American woman, specifically from one of the Caribbean islands, which I will not name because we're obnoxious. So you can guess who we are when we get in mixed company. But I remember growing up in a context where if someone identified as being homosexual, that their physical harm was sanctioned by the church and law enforcement. That's the culture that I come out of, right? And when I was a child, I thought it was wrong. I said, something's wrong here. Like, why would this be okay? And so part of what I would challenge viewers and fellow, believers in the body of Christ is when you hear somebody identify as a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, could you stop for a moment and just pay attention to how you're feeling in your body and start identifying what are those feelings causing you to do? Because if it's not welcoming folk in or even acknowledging, I don't understand, I don't like it, but I see you as a child of God, I see you as my child, then, that's where we're having some dissonance.
Yeah, even to Dr. Brooks, to your point, because sometimes it's like our reactions, we make it feel like it's about us and not about the individual that is
Correct.
trusting us to share this kind of information.
Yes.
So watching our responses to other people, we almost sometimes take it on as personal, like, oh, they tell me, no, that's them, that's not you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Banjoko, I want you to jump in here because Dr.
Yeah.
Brooks talked about this aspect of grieving, and she shared
Right.
very aptly that grieving occurs on both sides. And I think
100%.
yeah. And I think we overlook that at times, especially those who are within the church community. So speak to that a little bit and how we can either recognize what's going on or potentially how we can deal with what's going on and the cognitive
Right.
dissonance.
Right. Yes, I just want to say thank you to all three of you that spoke before me. I think all of you hit different areas. To just talk in general, to kind of like bring it home a little bit. For someone to come out and say, you know what, I either identify as gay or I identify as female, but my sex at birth was male, or for someone to say like I think I'm bisexual, we have to recognize the amount of courage that person must have to be able to come out, especially in Christian cultural context, right? And I'm speaking as someone who wasn't born Adventist. I joined the church later in life, and I can tell you in every denomination that I've been a part of, there is always a sense of what am I going to have to give up to be able to acknowledge what I've always known to be true. And I don't think we recognize that for someone to even come out and identify as anything outside of heterosexuality, it is a huge risk. Your life is at risk. Your community is at risk. How people see you is at risk. You might, in some communities, it's death that you're worried about. I don't think we recognize the amount of hate crimes, the amount of people that have been kicked out of their homes, the amount of people that have lost communities upon communities because they came out. So to what Dr. Brooks was saying, I think is acknowledging that for me to come out, I've been thinking it through. I've been calculating the cost. I've been thinking about how I might lose my family, how I might lose my kids, how I might lose my grandmother or my grandfather. Like there's so much for those of us, for those people that are coming out and, they're coming out of communities where they know that socially they're going to have to sacrifice that. There's just so much that's just at play here. So I just want to say, like, when we think about someone being like, oh, I'm gay, we just think like, oh, now like what Mira was saying, like you just wake up this morning and now you're like, I want to have sex with men. Like it's just so much broader than that. And you also have to recognize like what, especially for those of us that I identify as Christians, like imagine the magnitude of what they must have had to work through with God, that the biblical principles they've grown up with, the beliefs that are embedded in them, that now they're living a life in which there's just this, it's not congruent, it doesn't make sense, there's nothing there that, like, can we just like take a minute and just think about the magnitude of what that individual must be going through to be able to even come out, right? From all angles. That's grief. That is grief on so many levels. Grief in your relationship with others, grief on your standing in the community, grief with, does God even love me now that this is what I feel, that this is what I've always felt? Did God make a mistake? Am I a mistake, right? There's that level. And then I also want to speak to the other side, which is, also to my LGBTQIA2S plus people that are listening right now, like also recognizing that when an individual comes out, you've had time to think it through, be it 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, 4 years, right? The person you're telling to, that is new information for them. And I think we don't really talk a lot too about the other side of how much time it takes to now grieving what you thought you were going to have with this person, grieving the grandchildren and how you thought the grandchildren were going to show up, grieving how you thought your godchildren were going to show up, grieving the weddings you thought you were going to attend and all the things you thought you were going to do, the whole reality that you've built around this person, the expectations you've made of this person, the milestones you thought you were going to experience with this person, all of that now you have to start from scratch. And also come to terms with, dang, if I now say I support you, or if I now say that I see you, does that mean now that I'm also saying that everything God said is a lie? Like that in itself too is a whole process. And I think because we're so afraid of even hearing it, we haven't really been able to have the conversation of like, but hearing it is hard. And when you hear it, what do you do with it? And it's much easier to deflect or to avoid or to distract or to throw something out there and be like, no, versus actually being like, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't know what to do with it right now. And I'm going to need time to process. Right. And yeah.
No, sorry, please finish.
If I could interject something.
Go ahead.
Sorry. This is what happens when you get a bunch of females together to talk, right? We don't know where to interrupt, but we all got something to say.
Before you do that, I'm actually going to, because you just mentioned, all females, and so I'm going to get some support on my side. So joining us in this conversation is Dr. Jamie Kaulasar, who has relentlessly pursued community activism and involvement, challenging the church to heed the call of Christ to be relevant and present in the lives of those in need. He is a fierce defender of justice, a fierce defender of not just religious liberty, but also social justice. He's has a PhD. He's pursuing a PhD in public policy and social change, but he also has a Doctor of Ministry, and he works within community in Dallas. He works with people from many different faiths to again fight for equality, for race, for social justice. And so, Dr. Cowlerson, thank you for joining in. I know you're joining in off the train has left the station, but but Amira, please finish your thought, and then I'm going to kind of change the direction of where we're going based on Dr. Banjoku, who was talking about some of the struggles that we face within the church community. Being presented with individuals, loved ones who come out or who identify as part of the LGBTQ community. And so, Amira, just please.
I just wanted to comment about when someone may come out to you or reveal what they have been keeping secret. The one thing, and I have lots of these conversations with churches here in the Southern Union, and I get the same response. And it's a response that I really wish people wouldn't say, because what the response is, well, this person has revealed to me this issue. And well, what's your response? Well, my response was, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin. And how many times have you heard people say, well, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin? I mean, if somebody reveals to you, hey, I'm an adulterer, I've had, X number of affairs, do you say to them, well, I love you as a sinner, but I hate that sin? No, you say, well, I still love you, and then you stop. Or you say, I still love you, and I'm going to pray for you. If somebody tells you, I've been struggling with alcoholism, you don't say, well, I love the sinner, but I hate this sin. You don't say that. You say, well, I still love you, and I know you're going through a struggle, and I'm going to pray for that struggle. I'm going to keep you in my prayers. When you say, I love you, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin, what you're telling that other person is, I'm going to try to love you like I used to love you, but now all I can see is the sin that you have revealed to me. And that is a horrible, horrible way to react to that revelation, because someone has trusted you enough to give you that piece of them, and this is your reaction. So if there's nothing else you can get from this conversation today, it's please don't give the I love the sinner, but I hate the sin response to someone opening up this conversation with you, because it is possibly just the worst relationship killer that you could probably have with them.
So, oh, go ahead. No, you were gonna, I don't want to interrupt. You were going to say something? No? Okay. All right. So, Dr. Cowlerson, I want you to jump in here, because we started off kind of trying to define terms and recognizing that it's big, it's broad, it's ever evolving, and we are going to make mistakes, and we are going to because we're trying to wrestle with this, it is going to be awkward, it is going to be potentially triggering, etc. And so we've tried to have some education and continue to have that so that we can try to be a little bit more sensitive. We've kind of talked about how it's affecting both members of the LGBT community, but also church or members, or individuals who are heterosexual. But I do kind of want you to speak from a church perspective, because there is that tension between trying to uphold the tenets of the church, but also recognizing that as a church, we are here to reach out and meet the needs of the community, which includes the LGBTQ community. And I know that's an uncomfortable space. So from your perspective, how is that going? I guess I should say.
Yeah. Thank you for that thank you for that question, and I want to celebrate my panelists and to the courage to have this conversation. So I would start by saying that the number one tenet of the church is to love, right? Is to exemplify the love of God, the love of Christ on all humanity. So therefore, what I see when I see people, I don't see a gay person. I see a person who is gay, right? So I humanize all people. So I'm coming to them from a human perspective, but not ignoring their plight, their story, or whatever it may be. I think the other challenge that the church has is that we approach conversations with a bias and a preconditioned bias from false narratives about LGBTQIA plus communities. And the way that we can only bridge that gap and dispel those false narratives is to have conversations with the community, right? To let them lead, to let them guide, and to understand. My pastoral ministry and my theological framing may be quite different from my counterparts, but the individuals that have come to me and have expressed their sexuality or have expressed, expressed their sexuality, I'll put it there. My next response is, okay, how do you want to serve? Right? Like, because I still see you as a human. I do believe that you have a spiritual framing within you. I am not here to wash you and cleanse you and to do other things. I am here to create an inclusive community because on the flip side, right, I think sometimes we use the LGBTQIA plus community as a target
Yes.
to ignore the real issues that we are dealing with in the church. They become a scapegoat, a community that is easy to attack. When at the end of the day, they are not attacking us, right? They want to be included, they want to be a part of. And I was just celebrating what I've heard prior to the conversations about, let's just consider how difficult it is, right, to come out. Even the challenge with with being gay, with being a part of that community and trying to exist within a church because you love God, right? You want to serve. So all of those things. So I think to answer the question, I think the number one tenet of the church is to love people, to receive people, and to welcome them, and to stand alongside with them.
Okay, so thank you for that. One of the goals of this show, and recognizing that this topic is too broad, it's too deep, it's too complicated for us to try to solve, so to speak, in an hour. But I at least want to begin to have the conversation, begin to put it out there. And again, I'm not trying to come from a perspective of right or wrong. I'm not trying to come from a perspective of theology. I'm trying to come from a perspective of how do we show Christ's love, and that balance, that tension between showing the love of Christ but also adhering to the teachings of Christ. And we can have a discussion at another point, another juncture, in terms of, or another show, in terms of what those teachings were, or the tension between law and grace, and etc. But that's not the purpose of this show. The purpose of this show is to help us to identify some ways that we can tangibly demonstrate the love of Christ. And I know that our time is kind of moving, and so I want to try to turn the conversation in that direction, in terms of both from the perspective of, and let me say here, I recognize that people may say that our program is somewhat flawed, fundamentally flawed, because I don't have a member of the LGBTQ community on the panel, and I recognize that. But again, there's no way that I can be all encompassing and deal with everything at the same time. But where we are now, the baby steps that we may be taking. What are some strategies? What are some things for us to consider in terms of how we can tangibly demonstrate the love of Christ, and how we can also reconcile within ourselves the tension within ourselves as we seek to serve the community and all the community, and recognize that, be transparent. John 3:16 is taking on an increasingly more personal and deeper and profound meaning in my life when, when we're told, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him. And it's that word whosoever that is the challenge for and I just want to put it out there for our church community, for our faith community, because we want to limit, we want to pass out that whosoever. But when I look at Christ, he did not. When he says whosoever, he meant whosoever. So
whosoever.
Yeah, no. So, help me here. Help me.
So I'm glad. I'm so thankful for Dr. Kalasar being on the panel with us and starting off by saying, when someone comes out, okay, well, how are you going to serve? If we really believe what the scriptures teach about God, that from Genesis to Revelation, the Bible is telling us of a God who comes looking for humanity to be in relationship, then the church's number one responsibility is to be the kind of place where people can meet this God. That's our number one responsibility. And Amira said something earlier, and I wrote down, I praise God that she knows churches where people can talk about the fact that they're alcoholic and they can talk about the fact that they had affairs, because I don't know any of those places. Right? So the truth of the matter is, we have to become the kind of church where it is safe to be yourself. Right? This is what it means to be a part of the family of God. The disciples who followed Jesus were hot messes, period. None of them had it together, all the way up to the night when they ran off and left him, right? So we who are the embodiment of the family of God, as in the church, ought to have personal knowledge that everybody who's showing up is welcome, regardless of whether I agree with it or not. Now, here's what I'll also say, and anybody can jump in at any point to tag me out. I sit here on this panel today, having been engaged with this conversation for over 30, almost 40 years of my life. And so I want to make it clear, this is not you don't just quickly pivot on this. This is going to take time. What's our rush? Lean into the thing. Be aware of your feelings, because if we belong to the family of God, the last time I checked, whosoever means everybody. Turn to your neighbor and say, everybody.
That's right.
Everybody.
Yeah. I agree with Dr. Brooks, 100%. And, to answer your question, Pastor Goodrich, like, for me, I think we need to lead with love, right? And we also need to lean into the uncomfortable. Yes. I think the church is very much tries to be safe and wants to stay away from conflict or places that would make them uncomfortable. So I believe in leading with love, and then also another tangible step is to listen. I think creating a safe space within the church, inside the church, where they can come and we can listen. Doesn't have to be in front of the whole church, but that we can listen. Because sometimes, like one of the things that we tend to do from a church perspective is we do this in the community. We do this for the community as well. we kind of lead from the balcony and we think we know what people want. We think we know what people need. And at the end of the day, when we listen to them, we may actually hear the total opposite of what we think the community needs, right? So I think a tangible step would just be willing to lead with love and to make yourself vulnerable enough to listen, to sit back and listen, to hear, and then take it from there, right? Because the first step is building relationships. And if we use the Christ method, right? If we use the Christ organizing method, he listened to people, he met their needs, and then he asked them to follow
Come
him.
follow me.
We
Yes.
try to do it the opposite way. We want you to follow me and then change you, and then we'll think about meeting your needs. Let's not get into transactional relationships with people because we're trying to just
Mm,
get them inside a pool. Let's
Oh,
lead with
mm,
love and listen. And I believe that's the first step. And then there also has to be an internal detoxification within the church and our brains of the narratives that we have bought into about the LGBTQIA community. They are not sexual deviants. They are not walking people with HIV. They don't rub off on you and things like that. These are hard working, tax paying citizens that love God just as much as you do, and some even more.
even to
amen.
even to Dr. Calazar's point, I feel like another practical step is showing people respect. A lot of times when you see people who identify in the LGBTQ plus I community, they go by different pronouns, and I think having the basic level of respect to call them how they're preferred goes a very long way.
No, I appreciate that because I am looking for some practical, tangible ways that we can, demonstrate the love of Christ.
And I would
yeah.
also
If
say to Sierra's Lewis, I'm gonna tag you in, Dr. Banjoko. When
I,
someone asks you to call them by a pronoun and the pronoun is incongruent with what's in front of you, it's okay to say, it might take me a minute.
Yes.
Like, let me catch my breath, right? And if you make a mistake, they're going to give you grace for making the mistake because it's new for you. But when you wholeheartedly decide that it's against your Christian values to respect what I'm asking you to call me, then what you're saying is you don't see me.
Mm-hmm.
Tag Dr. Banjoko.
right. No, I really appreciate that. That is absolutely correct. I think that even when I practice, right, I have a client right now I can think off the top of my head, and they identify as they. And there are moments where we'll be talking, I'll be like, well, well, she and I'll be like, I am so sorry. I used the wrong pronoun. I meant when they. And they're like, Dr. Banjoko, like it's thank you for trying. I appreciate it. And every time you make a mistake, I appreciate that you're humble enough to be like, I misspoke or I made a mistake. I don't think they're expecting perfection from us because they're actually a pretty realistic group of people when you really like I mean they're not expecting us to be able to just be out here help waving flags with them immediately like they get it to I'll say in general most of them get it to a certain degree. I think one thing I will add, not even add, I'm just adding to whatever that what's been happening is I think sometimes we forget that God is big enough and sometimes we be fighting God's battles for him
Mm-hmm.
My
in
God.
the sense that
Mm-hmm.
I think that we're so big on converting people and making them walk the right way and making sure they don't sin and trying to help them stay in the, straight and narrow. This is in general, not just with this, but I think sometimes we forget that all we have to do is love and God convicts. It's the Holy Spirit's job to convict. It's not our job to convict. If you are living a life in which you are showing God's love, you're showing God's character, you are doing the things that God has called you to step into and live by. Let other people see that light and move with it. But for you to think that your job is to do the Holy Spirit's work for people and change them so that they can be in the will of God, how the audacity. For
Mhm.
me, I don't know about the other
Mm-hmm.
people of God in the room, but
Oh,
for me, it's the audacity.
uh,
Can
you
God
know,
be God?
Yeah, I'm all for that. I'm just like, there are bigger fish to fry right now that
My
the
Lord.
church really needs to address, that the church has the
Facts.
power to address. When we talk about food insecurity, food apartheid, we look at injustice. I mean, I'll say white supremacy in the church and outside the church, trying to focusing on, the LGBTQIA plus community and trying to change them, because at the end of the day, they are not the reason for mass incarceration.
Nope.
They're not the reason for the rich not being taxed and the middle class being overtaxed and the poor being stepped on. They are not to blame for the ills of the society, right? And there is a power that the church has, that if we galvanize all of it, all people together to fight against these ills, then we can create a better society for our children until Jesus Christ comes.
Mm-hmm.
So do I use my energy on trying to convert someone, or do I use my energy on education, empowerment, and equity? And that's where I stand on the line.
Mm-hmm.
As
And
we,
Paul, one
yeah,
another
please.
thing, sorry.
Mhm.
I think we need a little bit of an explainer here too to understand, because a lot of times, and we're seeing this in religious liberty, where within a workplace we have someone who is a Christian and who is refusing to call someone by their chosen pronoun, and they're going to get in trouble for it because there doesn't want to be seen this atmosphere of hostility against other employees within the workplace. And so quite commonly what I find is that church members will call and say, I refuse to acknowledge this person's selected pronoun because that's not who they are. That's not who God created them to be. And I'm not going to lie and say she's a he when I know she's a she. Um, what they don't understand, and there are lots of people with doctors in front of their names. So if I'm off base on this, please feel free to say, no, you're wrong, Amira. But I think that what we need to understand is that when people are putting out preferred pronouns, this is really not a accusation towards God. It's not an accusation necessarily towards their biological sex, which is either male or female. What is happening in the society that we live in this postmodern world, post-Christian world, is that people see things like pronouns as artificial societal constructs,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're really being rebels against society, right? Because they say, well, who are you to tell me what pronoun I can use and not use? This is what society says, and I don't have to go with what society says. I'm going to choose something different for myself. And so I just want people to understand it's not always a this isn't necessarily a culture war, you against them on the pronouns. This is just something where they're thinking differently, and they're so far outside of the box you think in that you think, well, this is against God, and they think, no, this is against society and what society has constructed for the place and time that we live in, and I'm railing against that. So again, just keep in mind, if you listen to their story, if you listen to what they're telling you about themselves and how it differs from you, you will come to realize that this isn't I hate God and I hate being what I was born and I don't want to, they're very often they're just seeing it as a social construct. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that as well, especially on the pronoun issue.
I
Yeah.
appreciate what you said, Amira, and I want to even emphasize it a little bit more. When you said we're in a post-Christian world, I hope our viewers can sit with that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a post-Christian world. And if your worldview has you thinking that everybody is Christian, I'm here to disavow you of that. So when you are in an environment with someone who does not identify, let's start with people who don't even identify as Christian, right? And they say to you, call me they. And you say, I don't want to because I'm lying to God. Um, I need to challenge the way how you're looking at how God sees this person. Because Brother Paul, in my interpretation, would say, "Become all things to all people, so I can win some." If they say call them they, please. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it might make you feel uncomfortable, but spend some time talking to other people to discuss why you're so uncomfortable with that, so you can work that all the way out. But respect the
Yeah.
person who's in
Mm-hmm.
front of you. And I would be remiss if I did not say something that one of my queer colleagues has been challenging me to say. One of the things we as a church must think about is whether we will be complicit in supporting systems that create hostile environments, especially for our LGBTQ plus youth, where the fear of being kicked out of their homes, especially those who are growing up in Christian homes, that if they tell the truth to their parents, that their parents are going to kick them out of their houses. How is that the family of God, y'all? The
Mm-hmm.
suicide rates amongst LGBTQ youth is higher.
Very high.
We cannot be complicit as children of God in supporting this idea of dispossessing the family of God from being in the community of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like we
Yeah.
cannot be complicit with those systems.
Yeah. I mean, can I jump in? This is so
Yes.
good. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I want to thank just for those two comments, and I also want to go back to the pronouns, and for a tangible way is we need to read and learn and
My
study
God.
on our own as well. And for the simple fact that there have been multiple cases about gender misidentity when children are born, that we are too quick to that the doctors have been too quick to what's the word, to appropriate gender when a child is born, and that later on they're discovering, hold up, something was wrong here. So when somebody says, hey, I may be in a male body, but inside I feel like a woman, right? We have to also be considerate of that. Like some Christians will be like, I don't know, they are this or they are that. You don't understand what's happening inside of a person's mind or body for you to make that kind of determination immediately, that you feel like you are defending, or you are the God police, right? And things like that. And then also to the point, like, what kind of systems are we perpetuating as a church, as a body of believers, that cause adverse effects because we chose to turn our back or our shoulder on a community that is crying out, right? The children that are crying out. And even like healthcare, we're a church that believes in the health message. We believe that all people should have healthcare because they are human. And then, as we talked about the death of Christianity, I want to throw this out there too. We are watching also the slow death of religion,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We are watching religion, and people are choosing to be spiritual, not religious, or to belong to a religious group. And it's because of these types of conversations. Not, well, it's because of why we're having this conversation, because of how people have witnessed how the church gangs up on certain things, the wrong things, and not on the actual things that will produce and create a better society.
So as we start to land the plane, because I recognize we're it's just getting good, but I know our time is getting away from us. There are some things that, and I do want to give you time to kind of give your one kind of closing thought, closing kind of sentence, so to speak. But some things that I've heard, and some things that have resonated with me, is the fact that acknowledge how we feel. on both sides, and acknowledge that on both sides we're grieving. There is grief. There is hurt. There is confusion. There is cognitive dissonance. There is dis-ease on both sides. Secondly, focus on the relationship, so that you can understand, so that we can understand, so that we can know, because we are all individual people. We are all people. We are brothers and sisters, and I say that from a spiritual perspective. We are children of God, and again, I just want to put it out there. This is a religious show which has a particular biblical worldview. And so understanding and believing that we were created by God. He created each and every one of us, and we are interrelated, interdependent. Also recognize that that God loves us, and his desire is for us to be with him. And he has done, is doing, and will do everything that he can for us to be in that forever saving relationship with him. Recognizing that he created us, that sin has come into the world, but more than that, sin has affected each and every one of us in different ways. None of us are perfect. None of us are sinless. None of us are beyond needing saving and restoring. Recognizing and understanding that when Christ comes, all things will be made new. And then recognizing that Christ's mandate for us was to love everybody as he loved them. And it's something that will, Dr. Brooks, you said it's going to take time. We have to acknowledge it's going to take time. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to trip. We're going to make huge gaffes. We're going to offend, not deliberately, but unintentionally. We're going to offend. But if we can extend grace on both sides, as we wrestle out this issue of what does it mean to love like Christ, and what does it mean, what does the whosoever mean? That grace, that forgiveness, that restoration, that eternal life is for whosoever. Maybe just this conversation, it just moves the needle, just slightly, to be able to get us to be at the table together to talk. And I recognize, again, I want to put out there, I want to apologize to both communities if I have not, or if we have not said what you wanted us to say in the force and the manner that you wanted us to say to prop your position, etc. My position is we need to demonstrate the love of God. And how do we do that? And so with that, I'm going to ask each and every one of you, in one sentence, how do we practically demonstrate the love of God? I'll begin with you, Dillis, Dr. Brooks.
It has been my privilege to serve as a campus chaplain for the last 17, almost 18 years here at Loma Linda. And I would say if to do this demonstration of the love of God is to be loving, be someone that people would want to come and tell their story. People have been telling me their stories about their sexuality since I was about maybe 19, 20 years old, and it hasn't stopped. And I've made mistakes in the process of hearing those stories. I've grown in the process of hearing those stories. And as a parent of two children, two human beings, I have come to recognize that I have no power or control. And the thing we did not talk about, is I punt the ball, is we haven't talked about the shame. And that's the secret sauce that's holding all of this anti behavior towards people who are LGBTQIA plus, because we're ashamed. But the truth of the matter is that if we've come to Christ, anybody who is in Christ is free. They are forgiven. They don't have to live in shame. So as someone who's received that, I want to give what I have received to other people and to be open to give that back to them.
All right, thank you. Dr. Benjoku?
Yes, thank you. I just want to say, to the side that is struggling to hear this, I also just want to also say that just because we're asking you to love does not mean we're saying that you must also believe, right? Like, we're acknowledging, and I love that you started this conversation by saying that we're not here to debate what is right or wrong. We're just here to be like, okay, as people who say that we're following Jesus Christ of Nazareth, what does it mean for us to show up in these communities? And I just want to say, just because, even if you do not agree, even if you do not believe, even if you have not been convicted to a point of even recognizing why this is an issue, I just hope that you can just understand that on the basis of them being human beings, how can we just show them the love of Christ as just human beings who exist in this world and are looking for people who can show them the love of Christ? If we can just look at it from that perspective, just because we're asking you to love them does not mean we're saying that throw away your theology, throw away your doctrine. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying, can you allow yourself to just be a little bit uncomfortable in being able to just sit with someone who may not have the same principles or the same ideologies that you follow, and just like allow them to be in your space, allow them to just sit in your pews, allow them to come into your house for a potluck? Like, can we just
Yes.
kind of expand a little bit how we see them and how we invite them into these Christ-led spaces? And I will end with this, that let us not forget how history is repeating itself in different ways. For those of us that know church history, we cringe right now when we hear about the Crusaders, but are we any different?
My God.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Calazar.
Oh man, I mean everything that was shared is like they were reading my minds. I would say the first revolution is internal,
Yeah.
and I believe that there must be a revolution within in regard to how we view humanity. That we need to stop drawing lines of separation and stop creating this us versus them, and look at more of a we, right? How can we work together? And I love the idea of leaning into the uncomfortable. And so I would say to the church, if I'm talking to the church, be courageous, be committed, and stay curious. And what I mean by that is let's continue to ask questions. Let's not stop the conversation. Let's continue to be curious about advancing the gospel and the love of Jesus Christ and being committed to love and to creating change.
All right. Amira?
Well, I know my people, and I know my people are sitting here still thinking that they can't get past the sin to love the sinner. So I think that it's appropriate that I leave you with a quote from Ellen White, because I think that what she says sometimes goes over better than what I say. But what she says is so appropriate. And this, for anybody who wants to look up this quote, is from God's Amazing Grace, page 78. And in it, she writes this: no sin is small in the sight of God. The sin which man is disposed to look upon as small may be the very one to which God accounts as great crimes. The drunkard is despised and is told that his sin will exclude him from heaven, while pride, selfishness, covetousness go unrebuked. But these are sins that are equally offensive to God. We need clear discernment that we may measure sin by the Lord's standards. And so let me just say that God doesn't rank sin, and it's not our place to rank sin. It is our place to love the sinner, which is everyone. If you're watching this show, that's you. If I'm speaking on this show, that's me. So God doesn't rank sin, and we shouldn't think that we need to do that for him. All we are told to do is to love God with all our heart and our neighbor as ourselves.
Thank you. And Sierra, you're with me. I'm gonna leave you. Yeah, you now have the pressure of the last word.
Yeah, sorry. No, I think my practical note would be to try to love and lean into your own insecurities and understand what your deficits might be so you can learn and love to respect somebody else.
All right, all right.
That's good.
Listen,
That's good.
everybody, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I want to thank you for giving of your time, for giving of your expertise, for helping us, for helping me as we wrestle with issues. You know, the reality is this world is not our home. And, again, I believe in God, and I believe that this is not what God created. The issues of this world is not what God created. The injustices of this world is not what God created. And he has placed us in this world to be his hands, to be his feet, to be his voice, to be his heart. And I'm just trying to get to the point in my life where I can start loving as Christ loved. I'm rereading the parables. I'm rereading the encounters with Jesus Christ and how he treated people. And it's sobering. It's making me, reevaluate and rethink what it means to be a Christian, a follower of Christ. And so I just hope, those of you watching, I hope that in some way, shape, or form we have helped to ignite thought. Maybe we've inspired you to action. I hope that we've integrated faith principles in the discussion. And I hope that we've also informed you about the idea of and the topic of gender identity and the church. Hopefully we can address this subject again and maybe go even deeper and some other ways. But for now, we just want to leave you with Christ loved. And if we're going to be like Christ, then we have to love like Christ. The second Thursday of every month. And we seek to discuss issues related to common life, everyday experiences, matters of public affairs, matters of religious liberty. And so we invite you to join us. Please, share this program, like us, and subscribe to our channel. Again, I want to thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time on The Public Square.